Welcome to the AI Security Update, hosted by Dr. Anmol Agarwal, where we break down the latest in AI and security with experts on the front lines, focused on what you need to know without the hype. Welcome to the AI Security Update, where we discuss the latest in AI and security. Today, I'm so excited to introduce our guest for this episode, Alyson. So Alyson is a friend of mine we met on LinkedIn, and she's bringing the law and legal perspective to the AI security conversation. So welcome to the show, Alyson.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, we are proof that LinkedIn works when you use it the right way. That we actually met through different connections and have been able to work together over the last couple of years. And so I'm honored to be part of your podcast today. Thank you so much for having me.
So Alyson, can you introduce yourself to our audience and also your perspective on AI security?
Absolutely. My name's Alyson Laderman. I am a more than 2-decade litigation attorney here in Florida in the United States, and transitioned the last couple of years ago into the cybersecurity space as an executive for a certification company. And I am now the CEO executive director of a brand new nonprofit that is focused on workforce development to ensure that our communities and our businesses remain cyber safe.
Now, Alyson, based on your experience, what are some challenges you've seen in AI and security?
Well, there are so many to choose from. So we'll take it from the lawyer perspective on this one. So one of the things that we're seeing quite a bit, there's a lot of things we're seeing. So there's that when you turn to AI, because it can be an effective tool if used the correct way. There are a lot of law firms as well as pro se litigants, those that are representing themselves, turning to AI for advice and for support and guidance in how to draft certain things. And so there's a couple of things that have come up as part of that. One is where people are putting in actual documents unredacted with personal information into the models, which are causing discovery issues in litigation. And so we are starting to see where the courts are having to come up with when is the use of AI needed to be disclosed so that we know what model and the terms and service that are being used. And depending on those terms of service, what are the limitations? So there's a recent case law that just came out within the last week or so where the court had a pro se litigant and there was a motion for protective order and a motion to compel, essentially, where someone was asking the court, one side was saying, hey, we want everything they put into the model, meaning we, the lawyers, want to know what the pro se representing themselves put into the model. And that person said, nope, that is my work product that I have put together in my anticipation of litigation thoughts. So it's protected. And the court partially went, maybe, depending on the model you used. So depending on the terms of condition, is this a public version? Is there any expectation of, we'll say, privacy, or that it wouldn't be a public or commingled with public assets? If you have voluntarily put your information into the system, into the AI tool that you're using, and the terms say, no, we can train on it and other people can have access to it, then is it really still privileged? And so that's something the courts are struggling with right now. And what's interesting about that is there becomes a socioeconomic, meaning there's a monetary factor that comes into play here, right? So in Florida, in our Constitution, you have a right to access to the courts, right? You can represent yourself. You should not be prohibited from doing that. And that includes your financial limitations. And so where people are turning to these tools for support to be able to represent themselves, if you say, hey, it's not privileged unless it's the higher, more expensive model that allows for that communication to remain private, that it's not trained on or whatever, are we creating an interesting limitation on have versus have nots, right? When you're talking about those types of things. And so the courts are really trying to weigh. It's interesting because there's a lot of different things going on. The ability to use a tool versus what information is being put into the tool and what is that expectation that that information put in there is going to remain private, as well as your ability to afford to keep it private. So it's an interesting thing that's coming out in the courts. And again, people that are not as well trained are putting information into the tools that shouldn't be, which then, of course, causes security concerns, right? If they're putting in medical records, financial records, employment records, all sorts of personal information that are in there and in those documents into a public system, that's a whole nother security issue, right? That is coming down the pike. Never mind the whole issue of the systems are still hallucinating and they make up case law. And so people are turning to these systems to create things for them instead of using litigation attorneys to help them with their issues. And the courts are now having to spend time, energy, and money figuring out, are these real? Are these not? Is this accurate case law? And so we're going to see a bit more, I think, of those bottlenecks in court, which will also cause that access limitation for people, right? If there's too much going on to where we can't get the resources to get people in to have their cases heard, that becomes a delay in society as well, which can cause other concerns.
Yeah, Allison, you brought up so many interesting points. A lot of people I've seen, they're treating AI like their best friend. And so they're openly disclosing things that maybe you shouldn't disclose to everyone. There was a story a couple months ago, I want to say 6 months or a year ago, where you could see all of the shared ChatGPT and Gemini chats. And some of those shared chats were people admitting to crimes and
Yeah.
asking ChatGPT for advice. And they detailed crimes and then what should the court do with that information? And then they could argue, oh, it was just me practicing before I go to court. Or like, it's my private conversation. I was talking to my AI friend but then people need to realize nothing you type into those tools is private or protected information. And Allison, what is your advice to someone who wants to use these AI tools for law? How do they decide what tools they can use? Or is that something that's still being debated?
Well, that's very much being debated in the courts. They're trying to say you can use them, but you have to know how, right? So one of the big issues coming up, there was a case just filed in March, alleges that OpenAI, ChatGPT, the way that their model worked in 2023 without any guardrails in place suggested that it was operating under an unlicensed practice of law. So that particular concept has been around quite some time. In its pure form, just to know what it is, it's when somebody or something holds itself out as a lawyer, gives legal advice to another person, prepares legal documents for someone else that requires some sort of legal judgment and up to representing someone else in court, right? And what happened in this particular case is, I'm going to pronounce it probably wrong, but it's Nippon, Nippon. There's a lot of articles for anyone who wants to take a look at it. It's kind of been all the flutter recently because it's the first one suing an AI tool for unlicensed practice of law. And I can tell you in the state of Florida, we call it UPL for short. So UPL is like if a paralegal came to you not with a law degree, hadn't graduated, hadn't passed the bar, drafted all of your documents, gave you legal advice, this is what you need to do, that's unlicensed practice of law. And that person could face sanctions and consequences leading up to prison time. In Florida, it's up to a 5 year prison sentence. The issue is in that particular case, this person had a lawyer, entered into a settlement agreement, solved their other case, went to AI and said, I think my lawyer is gaslighting me. And the tool said, yes, your lawyer was gaslighting you. And here's everything they did wrong. And here's all of the motions you need to file, which then resulted in this person saying, well, then I'm going to now do it myself. It gave advice on Federal Rule 60B, which is all about how to undo those settlement agreements and reopen those cases. Drafted pleadings. The person then filed up to close to 40 different pleadings and suing to reopen the case against this insurance company to try to get out of the settlement and redo the whole thing on their own. Ultimately, that resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars of fees and years of litigation because it brought in, because AI told it to, all of these extra witnesses, all of these different motions, none of which were legally founded necessarily, right? Because one of the issues that we see quite a bit is these models typically are made to work with you, and it almost acts like an echo chamber. That's why people start to feel that it's your friend, right, and your partner in things, and they forget this is just a tool based on predictive text and predictive info, like making predictions based on the information and knowledge it's learned to date. And so when people can't separate the reality of how a tool operates and how to use that effectively from how they're feeling because of the outputs that they receive, that's when we're starting to see these problems. And I think it's going to continue. We've seen lawsuits already for mental health issues related to it and studies on that, suicides, unfortunately, as related to where they feel that they're in a relationship with the tool. And so I think in the legal arena, we're really going to see the courts have to navigate all of these multifacets from the security issues of what's going in the system to what are we allowed to discover as attorneys in that discovery phase process of what can we get out of it. In the case I referenced earlier, what the court held was you need to tell the other side, you, Mr. Pro Se, which model you are using so we can at least assess what are the terms, what were the expectations, is it really privileged or not. But looking at that UPL case in particular, what's fascinating, what people really need to understand is why is that so dangerous, right? Well, why can't I just use a tool and file all this stuff in court? When you hire a lawyer, we are held to a certain standard of ethics and responsibility. Under our guidelines and the bar rules, we are not allowed to file anything that is not supported in law or in fact. AI doesn't have that limitation. When something goes wrong because your lawyer filed something, you have a recourse against your lawyer. When you file something based on what AI and it could cost you your life, liberty, business, whatever it is that you're fighting in court, you have no course of repercussion. There's nothing you can go back after and say, well, AI told me to do it. You voluntarily used that tool. So you really need to understand what those limitations are. You need to use your critical thinking skills. You can use it sort of to help you understand the questions and maybe what the parameters are. But to your point earlier, probably don't admit a bunch of crimes in there. um, don't put your medical records in there. I actually know somebody who will remain nameless, who is a medical professional, but puts it in there for her own kind of, she'll actually roundtable with it on diagnoses and things. And I'm just like, I hope you're not using a public version. You kind of wonder what people, they forget that what the tool is and how to use it. And so I think part of it is just remember what it is, what the limitations are. And when all else fails, start by reading the terms and conditions. I know none of us want to do that. Even the lawyers go, oh, goodness. But the reality is someone was paid a whole lot of money to write those tiny terms and conditions. And if you don't understand them, you can actually put them into the tool and ask it to at least give you a summary and then do that gut check and see if that summary aligns with the words that you're seeing on the page. Because you want to know what you are protected from and what, will stay within there. But I suspect anything crime related would always be discoverable in that regard. Because even as a lawyer, if you tell us something where you're actively, it is you know, we hold your confidences and your confidentiality, but there is a line just like therapists that if you're going to commit another crime and harm another person, then there are certain exceptions to the rule, in that regard. So I can see where that might also play out to these tools.
Yeah, and I think what people need to remember, right, Allison, what you said is AI is a tool. You can use it as a starting point to research some terms, or maybe you didn't understand a word that your lawyer said, but you should not use it as a replacement for these qualified professionals, law, cybersecurity, medical professional, even finance. I would say it's helpful to have a qualified professional do that for you versus relying on the AI tool. Now, it can be a good starting point if you want to try things yourself, but something serious like law, something where it would really impact your life or the life of someone else, I would recommend hiring a qualified professional.
And something to the point you said, right, at the beginning, which was, well, maybe you want to understand what your lawyer was saying.
Yeah.
I highly recommend, without giving legal advice, do not put your attorney client communications into the tool. Because again, if you're using a public tool, you may have waived that communication. And that attorney client communication is something you want to hold inviolate. You want to maintain that privacy. You want to maintain that security and those confidences with your lawyer. So you should treat the tool, if you don't understand which model you're using and what those terms are, you should probably assume that telling the tool something is like telling your friend who's going to tell another friend who's going to tell another friend and play the telephone game. And then a court may say, well, since you voluntarily did that, the advice your lawyer gave you now might be public. So it's just something to keep in mind that as you're using it, you don't want to put in, oh, here's my lawyer's email like that other woman did. I think they're gaslighting me type of scenario. Um, not in your best interest, right? And so everything that comes out of that tool should be checked, whether it's case law, whether it's citations to laws, regulations, rules that are going on, the court rules. Double check all of it because you don't want to make missteps in how you're using the tool and how you relay that information to a court.
Yeah, great points there. So, Allison, another question I have is when we look at responsible AI and AI ethics, there are different pillars of responsible AI. And one pillar I think you could help us on is the idea of accountability, which is when something goes wrong, whether an AI tool makes a mistake or someone using the tool made a mistake, who is responsible in the event something goes wrong?
That is such a great question. I think right now accountability is the biggest issue we have going on, right? Or lack thereof. When the tool spits out something wrong, let me start with this. If you are a lawyer using a tool, right? Ultimately, if you present something to court, the accountability is on you to get it right. So this goes back many, many decades. This has always been part of practicing law. If my paralegal had drafted something and I did not check it thoroughly enough and something was inaccurate, it is according to the bar, my responsibility, since I was the last one to fail to check it, to take accountability for that. When you're using a tool as a lawyer, it is still your accountability to check that the information from the tool is accurate. And that's what the courts are holding. Ultimately, you're finding that there are sanctions coming down to attorneys that are turning in, oh, I pushed it through. There's one in particular that is especially bad because he lied about his AI use. It was all fabricated, not real cases that came out, lied about it, used AI to draft his response, lying about it. And it was obvious to the court that, again, it had more fabricated citations. And we're like, dude, read the room. Like, you should have, you should have listened the first time. The court said, no, we know what you did. Just own it, and didn't. And so that particular attorney is facing, we'll say, extra harsh penalties and sanctions from that court. And I believe a contempt hearing is coming up for that behavior. And so when a lawyer is using the tool, there is that level of accountability. Now, if you're pro se and you're using it, the court doesn't expect you to be a lawyer, but they do expect you to follow the law and the rules. So you don't get extra leeway because you chose not to hire or engage with counsel to assist you in that process, right? So they may not sanction you because you don't understand the law, but maybe they do, right? Because you are still expected to come into court, or they just strike your pleadings, which is a sanction, right? That's what people don't understand is they may not say, I'm going to fine you, but they'll say, this is legally insufficient. It doesn't follow the law because you relied on the tool. So you're then accountable for your own actions that you chose to use that tool. What is making it interesting, is again those UPL cases. And we're looking at, well, was it the woman's fault for using the tool to undo the settlement and file all of these things? Or was it the lack of guardrails put into place where that woman actually felt that that tool, that particular model, was acting as her lawyer and giving her legal advice and encouraging her to continue down that pathway? So I am curious to see if the courts will hold the tool responsible in that particular scenario from 2023, because when you look at the facts, it's pretty egregious. It's not just oh, here's one motion. I mean, she filed 40 motions. I can tell you as a litigation attorney, if I file 40 motions in a year in your case, that is a really active case and a really bad day for the other side. Like, that is not something that we typically do. To even get into court for that kind of level of litigation, talk about clogging the pipeline, and especially if they're not validated in law or fact, right, for the court to have to deal with. So I think we're going to see, depending on the issues, who's using the tool, how it's being used, different levels of accountability. And I am keen to see how that particular case, the Nippon case, plays out with the courts.
Yeah, a great answer because I think this is a debate we're having even on the technical side as well. Is, for example, let's say we have an AI chatbot. It hallucinates, gives customers incorrect information. There was a case a couple years ago of an airline trying to argue that the AI tool itself is at fault and not the company that developed it. But from your perspective, if in a real like cybersecurity product and company, we have many different companies involved. It's a supply chain, right? So we have multiple parties involved in realizing this AI tool or cybersecurity product. And in that case, if there is a security issue in the supply chain, who would be accountable, or what is your advice to business owners or consumers of different products?
That is a great series of questions. So my non-legal advice, right? Because I can't give lawyer advice to businesses I've not engaged with. So, but my suggestion would be with any of the tools, just like what lawyers have to do, verify the outputs, make sure the information makes sense before you put it into practice. I understand small businesses needing different tools to be able to help get through certain situations quicker. Whether you're trying to put together handbooks or deal with an employment situation, anything that could cause you to have to go to court, you are better off finding a lawyer who lives in your jurisdiction, right? Who understands your particular needs to give you that specific advice. But you can use the tool, as you mentioned earlier, as a stepping point. Like maybe what questions should I ask my lawyer? What are the things I need to consider? That's where the tool can be helpful in brainstorming to help minimize your lawyer time, right? So instead of having your lawyer have to start from the very beginning to explain everything to you, if you can use the tool and double check that output and get that basic level of working knowledge so you can ask higher level questions to your lawyer, then you can get to the heart of what you're trying to deal with sooner. And that will cut down on your lawyer fees. And so I think as a small business, that's a very helpful thing, but you have to make sure that what's coming out of the tool that you're using is accurate. And I absolutely would not put in your employee's name. Like if you're doing it for an employment situation, do not put the situation and specifically an employee's name or any of that information. Definitely not dates of birth or social security numbers or anything like that. Anonymize the data, make a hypothetical if you need to, call it Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It doesn't matter as long as it's not tracked to a particular person in that regard. So with a lot of businesses, they rely on outside vendors for certain services. And you need to know some of the questions are, what AI are they using? I mean, right now we know there's so much AI baked into everything that we use, whether it's LinkedIn, Microsoft, Google, our iPhones, Androids, whatever has a different platform, and whether or not it's turned on, turn off, monitored, right, locked down in that version, you need to know what your vendors are using and how they're using it. And if your information and your customer information is going into that model, and if it's a protected model or not, is your information being trained? There's a lot of companies that are using agents that are basically wrappers on other models of other models, right? Type of thing. Sad to say, you do need to do that due diligence for your business because, as they say, ultimately the buck stops here with your business. I don't know how successful you would be in a courtroom saying, well, no, it's their problem, but I didn't ask them about their problem, but they caused the problem and all the finger pointing. That's not going to get you to a resolution sooner. You need, I would say, to do your due diligence up front, ask. Ask your vendor so at least you know what kind of potential risk you're taking on. And you can make a smarter decision of, oh, they're cutting corners. Maybe I don't know that I want to work with this vendor or not. And those are just things to help your business resilience in general, right? Is knowing who you're interacting with, knowing who they're interacting with, and how they're interacting with your data and what's being potentially exposed or not. That'll help you as an organization, whether you're a nonprofit, small business, large business, to make those decisions. And so when you're looking at that supply chain, ultimately, I think the courts are going to have to go through each one on a case by case basis and say, who knew what, where, when, what was in the contract, what did they disclose to you? Because sometimes vendors use things you don't know about, but not asking, I don't know if that will shield you from having to bear some of that responsibility, at least comparatively speaking. Ignorance isn't always bliss when it comes to technology. And I think that's one of my biggest cautions for businesses. It doesn't hurt to ask. It hurts to not know and then deal with the shadow cleanup on the back end of something that you weren't expecting.
I know a lot of small businesses, um, they don't have many people. Sometimes it's just one or two people, and they're trying to get something, running, up and running, and they don't really think about what would happen if their their data is breached or the tool stops working. But it's important to ask those questions. So for example, let's say you go to a conference and you decide to adopt an AI tool that was being exhibited at this conference. Then ask the salesperson and ask maybe the engineering team, like, how does this tool work? Where is my data going? What do you do with the data? And if they deflect and say, oh, don't worry about it, we'll handle everything, then maybe that's something you need to be cautious about, because you should know what's happening to your data and how it works. Because in the event something goes wrong, you need to be able to trace back and say, okay, I sent this data to this tool, this vendor, we had this agreement, and they violated the contract, which we already discussed that.
That's an excellent point, and I think businesses should heed that, right? Which is you should be tracing what information is going to where, so that if accountability does become an issue, at least you have some trail to start with to kind of follow the breadcrumbs and go, well, wait a minute, we think it was this issue, not this issue, and be able to narrow it down and help with that process. So I think that's great advice. Yeah, when a vendor says, "Oh, don't worry about it," you should worry about it. Typically. Non-legal advice there, but yeah, something to consider.
Yeah. So, Allison, you already touched on some current events, but as you know, this field is moving so fast. Is there another current event you would like our audience to know about?
I feel like I'm drinking out of a fire hose every day, trying to stay up to date with some of the latest. I know there's been a lot of chatter about the Mythos version coming out of Anthropic and what was released or not released publicly. I know some people had said that it was all of the code. A friend of mine who's a CTO, he's like, it was the front end code, not the back end of the code. I'm like, still seems problematic that got out from user error. It seems like that lesson is worth like looking at for businesses, depending on how much or whatever got out. The fact that there's still human error at some of the largest organizations, I think is a nice humble reminder that we are all human. Mistakes happen. And the whole thing is let's minimize those mistakes. Let's pay attention to what we're doing in our organizations and our data. I don't think we can just treat it willy nilly. I think like we used to, is like, oh yeah, we save it in a file and move on. You really do need to look at your organization, who's touching what, who has access, who's pushing things out, know who's working on your tech side, and what their skills are. A lot of small businesses assume that IT is the same as cybersecurity because they really don't understand that nuance. And now you have to add that layer of AI security on top of that. And so it is taking that time, even if you are a small business, even if you can't afford to have somebody else come in and help with that, to try to at least figure out who's touching what, where, when, why, how, and permissions, so that we don't have those oopsies. You don't want your client list accidentally getting published, right, somewhere in there, or your business trade secrets or whatever it is that's important to keep your organization running. Um, you don't want to see your code out the door if that's something you're creating. So I imagine I'm curious to see more of that. In looking at that one, you have to wonder how much it's really going to impact them. I've seen quite a few voices going, it's Anthropic, that it's not going to impact them at all. And so watching the marketing spin of that incident and that rollout has been interesting as well as the security side. So that was just something that I know I've seen in the news quite a bit. But yeah, every day there is a new statistic and a new incident and of a different flavor. And so, my question to you is, for someone who wants to learn about this stuff but not be overwhelmed, what are some good resources to stay knowledgeable without shutting down because the information is so much? But that way they can at least try to learn a little bit. What have you found that works for
Yeah,
maybe a small
that's
business?
That's actually why I started this show, was because I thought there's so much going on and all of us look at this so differently, right? Like your perspective as a lawyer, and then I have some guests who are, in the healthcare field or other fields, and I think we all think about AI differently. So some of us say AI is just generative AI. Some of us go into the more technical details of like AI and machine learning algorithms. But ultimately, how do people need to use it? That's something that I'm trying to do with this show. But my advice with people for people is that instead of getting overwhelmed by all the headlines, every episode that I provide is one current event where we talk about a concept, but it's more important to understand what that concept means or why this incident happened. And you'll start to see similarities of these patterns are common. And one of the main patterns we've seen is it's all about people, right? So it's always about people making mistakes or trusting something when they shouldn't have trusted it. And then following basic cybersecurity principles, confidentiality, integrity, availability, access control, encryption, things like that. That's really what you need to start with. I think that's the challenge we have in AI security is there's so much hype around it, and we need to understand what is actually happening and differentiate the marketing spin with the technical concepts, with the legal advice. And I also have some marketing people coming on my show as well, and they have an interesting perspective as well of like, how do you market this product? But I think it's something we need to use as a tool, like AI as a tool, versus thinking it's like the ultimate solution for everything, because it's not.
Agreed. Agreed. And, one more kind of, I guess, extra little tidbit on that. If you are using AI to create your branding and all of that for your business, you need to be super careful, right? Because it's trained on other people's images and other people's things. And so you want to make sure that's really where you definitely want a real lawyer to get in there and help you, or a real designer to help you design something that is new and unique to your business to make sure that you can keep that intellectual property and not infringe on someone else's. And so you've got to be super careful about which models you're using, how you're using them, what information it was trained on. I think it was Perplexity had issues with training on pirated written materials, other people's books that they were not paid for, and they got hit with that in a litigation. And so you really want to make sure not just that the outputs are accurate, but you really don't want to use anything that's based on someone else's stolen intellectual property because that could cause problems for you, in your organization. So
Is it something that should be protected? Because we see this with the trends, right? Image generation, like the Studio Ghibli trend, where people were just creating avatars of themselves and using that same artistic style. But what's your take on that?
So I think there's a couple issues that are getting a little bit uh, kind of entwined. So one is it training on copyrighted materials that belong to other people, right? And a lot of the times it is. Like Studio Ghibli is clearly designed to look like that material. And so when we're talking about if the outputs are copyrightable, as of right now, they're not. Right. So if you are using, I know there's a company that's using, like creating some AI product to write books using AI to then shove onto the Amazon platform. I don't think those are going to be copyrightable. Right now, under the copyright laws, one of the questions is, was this created, like solely created by a human? If any kind of AI was used for it, you cannot seek the copyright of that material, right? Of that output, because it wasn't solely created by a human and it was work based on other people's work. I haven't really seen a shift yet saying, there's been a little bit of like, well, there's been some discussion, we'll say, as to whether or not there's been enough manipulation or alteration by you as the end user to then make it unique and therefore, and so they haven't really come out with like the end result of that yet, but we'll see that because a lot of people use it to make music and they use it to make art. And so there is that question of, is it really art and music or is it just basically sampling other people's stuff. And so Omar and I had talked about that on an episode of the Cyber Metal podcast a while ago, and kind of pondered, where are we going to end up on that scale of, eventually, is there going to be how much human manipulation, and not just prompting, but I think on the output and then changing it, will kind of defeat the whole argument that this was computer generated, and based on other people's work. They haven't quite come up with a ruling on that yet, but I know if you try to seek the copyright as of right now of stuff generated, you can't, right? The courts, the rule is what it is, but then we'll see what the courts start to do with that as arguments are being made of, well, but we manipulated it a significant
Yeah,
amount. And then what does that mean? So
right.
imagine trying to measure, well, how much is enough that it's no longer based on somebody else's original concepts and work.
Yeah, great point. Because I know a lot of people, they're using it to edit grammar, so they copy paste their drafts into AI and then use it to edit, fix grammar or spelling mistakes or change their voice to sound more professional, quote unquote. But they do that. And then the challenge is if you put all of your draft into the AI tool, then could you claim that your draft, your original human generated work is protected or not? Because once you give something to an AI tool, you're basically saying, okay, AI, here's the data you can train on.
Correct. Right. And that's where it goes back to the terms and service. So are you allowing it to train on it? Is it something that now will kind of go into the public ethos where others will now learn your wording and your voice and your style? Especially if you're only having it tweak a few words here and there. It's probably worth taking the 5 minutes to tweak it yourself. I mean, look, I have used that for emails. I'm not going to pretend like, oh, I'm better than that. No, we have all done it, but we also want to be mindful. And this is something that's come up a lot recently in discussions I've had with professionals in the field. We are voluntarily giving up our personalities and our perspectives to this tool to homogenize us in a way that we are all going to sound the same, and we're going to lose our creativity. And there's a gentleman, actually, I have his book here. Hold on. I just got it this week and I do need to read it, but The End is Near, and AI Made Man in Its Image. So actually, there we go. So this is one that I'm reading from Doctor, and I'm going to butcher his name. Okay. Ikebuaku. He's actually the head of Mozisha out in South Africa, and teaching AI skills and on the security side to create workforce development out in South Africa, and then being able to work with people here in the States. And his whole thing that he and I had talked about, Dr. Ken, last week, was about how we are losing our voice, and we are losing as we're getting into that echo chamber, and now we're part of it, and we're voluntarily giving up our creativity. Instead of using the tool to help us expand our thinking, we go into it and say, hey, help me sound like everybody else because I need it to reach an audience or whatever. And
Yeah.
so we are losing that individuality. And I think we have to be very mindful of that.
Yeah,
So,
because now I've noticed, people are using it to sound, I said professional earlier, but it might not be professional. It might just be what other people sound like. And your unique voice is creative and it's something you should share. But if you just go online and you see the news articles, you've probably seen it too, Allison. Like everyone is sounding the same. I feel like everyone's using the same words, the same style. You don't have that uniqueness anymore. Like in English class, we were all taught to write using our own voice and, and like have different kinds of sentences and different lengths of your sentences and have a unique voice. But now it feels like everyone is sounding the same AI generated type of voice. But then people are also expecting that. So people are also being trained and thinking, okay, that's serious or that's professional. So what's your advice to people on this? Like how do they spot AI generated content? How do they have the confidence to write with their unique voice?
that is a great question. And, you know, I agree with you. It's easy to spot. And I've definitely done it for posts when I don't have time. And I say, here's the majority of my ideas and help me just format it into an organized area. Typically, the giveaways used to be, the joke was, oh, look for the M dashes. right? Now it's a dot, dot, dot. You get the ellipses. You also get the it's not X, it's Y argument, right? That type of thing. We see that over and over again. There's usually that weird little call to action to try to get people to engage. And people don't usually engage with that. I found that they're like, yeah, I'm going to ignore that last question you asked me in there. Um, it's a matter of really reading it. I think I saw the same post from three different posters on LinkedIn of the same, and it was, I'm rooting for you was the end result. And I was literally the same phrasing. And I'm like, can we stop rooting for people? I mean, look, I'm rooting for people. We're all rooting for people. I think if you care and you want to help others, you're genuinely rooting for people. But I can't remember the last time I'd used the phrase, I'm rooting for you. This is not the Wild West. Like rootin' tootin' is not a thing anymore, right? So you'll find those weird kind of phrases in there that you're like, you would never say that. And so I try to write in my own voice, even if I do use it to quite polish it. But then I go back and rewrite it anyway. If I don't like the what it has helped me, because sometimes I can't articulate what I'm thinking, and I'm thinking too fast. And so I will use it to help me organize my thoughts and the arguments that I want to make. But then I always go back and say, you know what? They want to know what I have to say, not what the AI has to say. And if they don't, well, then you just haven't found your audience yet, quite frankly. There's literally a flavor for everybody that is out there. And you should trust that you have something valuable to share that someone else is going to resonate with. And if you start with those posts and you come from that position, you will find that audience that is going to want to engage with you in that way. And it just depends on what it is you want to share and how you want to share it. Um, I don't think just turning on AI to auto post for you is going to generate the audience you think it is. Although some people do resonate with that, to your point, right? Where they're like, we're used to hearing that language and that thing. I can tell you, I tend to be relatively short in my emails because I got 1,000 things to do. And it's not that I'm trying to be rude. It's, hey, I'm answering your question. I'm saving you time. I'm saving me time, and I'm moving on with it. And I know that for some gentlemen that came off as terse or aggressive, not understanding that, hey, I respect your time. I don't think you want to read a whole bunch of fluff. Let me give you the answer and move on. But I realized that the way they were reading it was different than how my intention was. And so I actually started using AI and realized this is a very non-PC thing I'm going to say, but that overall the tone of AI models, specific models, tends to be, unless you tell it otherwise, kind of defaulted into white male. And so I have found that when I need to engage with certain people, that sometimes that phraseology will help in a way that I'm just not geared to phrase it. I don't have the platitudes. I mean, I'm very friendly, as you can tell. I'm happy to chat with people. But when it comes to emails, we all get so many of them. I get in, get out, and over, and that doesn't always resonate. So I do use it without giving away details and specific information to help me add, I don't want to say fluff and filler, but I mean, AI is great at fluff and filler to add those things to make it feel more personable sometimes than maybe an email might otherwise come out. But generally speaking, you don't want to lose your voice. And part of it is practice your creativity. Just even if it's just writing for yourself and you don't share it with anybody, don't lose that skill because it's going to be hard to get back otherwise, right? If we're so trained that this is the way we think we have to speak, you're going to start losing your own vernacular, your own vocabulary, your own way of expression. So I'm not a journaler, but I do sit there and write things out by hand because that's how I learn best. And I try to get my thoughts down in that way. Also, don't lose your critical thinking skills because that's really what sets us apart. And to be able to say, wait a minute, this output is not right. And I know that. And so trust yourself, trust your knowledge, trust your experience to be able to accurately validate what the tool is giving you when you do use it so that you can maintain that voice and use your creativity in that way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison. Great points. And I found that some people on LinkedIn were saying they actually use AI to help them. For example, there are a lot of people who are neurodiverse or neurodivergent, and they're saying AI is actually helping them blend in or sound more personable. Or even people from other cultures where English is their second language, then it can help them. But I think people also need to realize that there is some creativity that is lost when you're using these AI tools.
And there's value to diversity, hands down, right?
Yeah.
Attackers from all over the world do not all look, sound, feel, believe the same things. That's why it is so hard to defend against all like the onslaught of the different things that are coming from different directions. And so you need those different perspectives. You need people that are from different backgrounds, different beliefs, genders, you know, and even and especially neurodivergent people, right? They have a different way of thinking and processing that is absolutely valuable as we are putting up these defenses and going, wait a minute, I didn't think of that. And somebody else may go, but I did. And it is embracing those different views. And so I get why they would use them. Like I said, I've used the tool to try to navigate where the room wasn't as receptive to my voice at times, whether it's email or something else. But I also make sure that still trying to be uniquely me in the information that I'm sharing and how I share it and my thought process. And so there is that blend you can have. But yeah, if you generate something in AI and you copy and paste it and it does not sound like you like at all and it got rid of all of your original thought, do yourself a favor, go back in there and put your thoughts in there. Even if you need that buffer to help make the message feel more palatable to a wider audience, if that's the goal, but don't lose what makes you uniquely you and your gifts and your skills and that piece that makes you valuable to everything else in this world.
Thank you so much, Allison, for being on the show. My last question is, are there any resources you recommend for our audience?
Any particular ones you're looking for?
Just
There's so
anything
many
in
great resources.
general. Yeah, maybe
Oh
top
my
3.
goodness. Oh my gosh. There's so many different resources that are out there. If you're looking to check citations, we'll go on the lawyer side. I'll make it easy, right? Since we started with law. If you are generating things that are coming out of any of your AI program, AI tools, you can go to Google Scholar and look up the actual cases. If the case doesn't show up in there, it probably doesn't exist. Now, granted, that's only for holdings and end rulings. You won't find necessarily like day-to-day court filings in there, but it is getting a bit more expansive. But that is a great place. If you go to scholar.google.com, it is free. You can get in there and check the cases and read them for yourself and make sure that what AI is telling you the case stands for actually aligns with what you're seeing, in the case area. I'm trying to think of other things that would be helpful on what we're doing. If you are a small business and you are looking for specific resources, you can always check with your local small business development centers. We have several here in Central Florida, whether it's the National Entrepreneurship Center, whether it is the Small Business Development Center here at Seminole State College. There are resources that can connect you to those that can assist you further if you are considering security concerns, whether it's related to cybersecurity, AI security, or just wanting to learn more, right? And then I would say the third resource is a plug for a future thing. So at Cyber Metal, we are specifically geared towards offering cybersecurity and which will involve AI security as well, resilient services to nonprofits and small businesses from at a low to no cost scale so that it is not a barrier to entry to make sure that your business is secure and getting what you need while also creating that workforce pipeline for entry level individuals trying to get into the field. So for more information on that, you can go to mettle.org and take a look at what those resources are that might be able to help you in your business as you're getting into more of that technology space and keeping your business cyber secure.
Thank you so much again, Allison, for being on the show. So this concludes our episode of the AI Security Update. We'll be back next time with more great conversations. Thank you for listening to the AI Security Update. No hype, just what you need to know. Subscribe to catch the latest episodes and connect with me, Dr. Anmol, on LinkedIn for more insights from the world of AI security. We'll see you next time.